I wanted to talk today about some stuff that I've been doing this last week. For the last few weeks, I've been talking about some outdoor stuff and some things kind of related to the lockdown, pandemic stuff. But I might kind of change what I was talking about a little bit for this podcast. What I wanted to get into was some of the training stuff I've been looking into around Logic Pro 10.5 that has just come out recently, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to go over a little bit of an overview of some of the new features and stuff that are there, and some of the stuff that you can do with a digital audio workstation, and why I'd bother talking about it. But I think it was about a year ago or so, I was talking about setting up this studio in the house that I'm at here, and how I was getting a PC computer ready to go. It was an older one. It was, I think, like something from some desktop I had around from 2010 or 11 or so. Yeah, about that time. And I remember getting that computer set up with I think it was, I had like Windows 10 on it, and then I was using, I think, this same audio interface, USB out into the computer, and then I had downloaded Sonar, the new version of Sonar that you can get for free. I think it had been owned by what was Cakewalk Sonar, and then I think Gibson had bought out Cakewalk. And so it became Gibson Sonar, and then I think Gibson decided that wasn't going to be part of their business anymore, so I think they just kind of shut it down, essentially, but then sold that off to BandLab. And BandLab is it's another internet company. They have kind of a simplified digital audio workstation app that you can use to kind of create a demo or something like that. But what they had done is they'd gone through, I guess, and had purchased, probably for a relatively inexpensive price, I assume, since they're just keeping it and kind of hardly maintaining it, or doing a bit to maintain it. But they took the Sonar Platinum program, the full digital audio workstation multi-tracking tool, and they made it free for people to use and for people to get. But I think it's only a Windows-only program, so you got to have Windows 10 to run it. So I did that, yeah. And Sonar was a program that I had worked with before for doing some studio multi-tracking stuff, I think years ago, probably around like 2012, 2013, when I was working with some friends to set up some studio equipment stuff. It was cool. We had like a big Soundcraft Ghost that was laid out, and then we had a bunch of channels kind of running into that from the microphones that we're using to track this band, and then that all went into a pretty old computer. It was amazing what it could do, for just it was probably like a 2 gigabyte of RAM, smaller hard drive, 2004, 5, 6 era PC computer. No, I probably wouldn't even need that much, right? There's something about that time. But that's what we used. Yeah, that's like all we had with us. We had I think it was like a PreSonus audio interface, and then we got like an 8-channel audio interface. That was really cool. We had like eight digital audio channels coming into the interface, which means we could track 8 live channels into Sonar at a time, and it didn't even hiccup, even on that old machine. And so it was interesting how that architecture worked to do some editing stuff. But Sonar is what I had been using before for some stuff. Really, Adobe Audition is what I'd used most for some of this kind of the more simple I think they would do like a water level report. It was really interesting radio on that station, you could figure. But they would have like this, something like, it's 12:45, and here's your local water level report for July 28th or something. And then it would be some lady that would call in from a department that would measure this stuff, and she would give her water report, and the production guy, he would record it and then produce that, and then it'd be prepped to go out on air later, as like a spot that a DJ would trigger upstairs. And so we would kind of walk through using Audition to do those steps. And so learning that as a program was probably the first one that I had done, which probably goes back to high school or before that when I was doing editing stuff. But Sonar, back to Sonar, was some of the stuff that I'd used probably a good bit more for the music, like trying to like track a band or do like multi-tracking projects. But so yeah, that's what I'd used a bit. That's what I'd thrown on this Windows 10 PC to do some audio production stuff for this podcast workflow that I was trying to get into. And it's cool. It works really well. But I stopped using that computer a while ago. I think the the Windows 10 computer that I'm talking about had a power supply go bad, which could be replaced pretty easily, and is on a to-do list of mine. But since then, I've really just been relying on, kind of like I'd mentioned, just recording onto the device, and then using Adobe Audition to do the post-production work on my MacBook, which is, I don't know, it's just a better workflow and stuff for the most part. So I've been kind of sticking with that. But recently, to get to the point, as you are all excited, Logic Pro 10.5 has come out. Now, Logic, as yet to be mentioned in this podcast, Logic Pro is the program that was produced by Apple as their professional digital audio workstation. And so there's GarageBand, which probably a lot of people have some experience with. And GarageBand is sort of the trimmed down, simplified home user version of a program like Logic Pro. And they've done that intentionally. I think it's the same team that generates the two programs. And if you look at them, or you look at their interfaces, and you look at the types of access that you have to things, you really do see a familiar similarity to it, which is cool. So if you've used something like GarageBand in the past for home projects, you won't really have as big of a difficulty moving into a more professional digital audio workstation environment like Logic Pro 10. So I think it was Logic Pro 10, just 10.0. It came out, I don't know, probably like 2013 or so. And I think that was sold for $200. So it was like a purchase price of $199. And then since then, you get the point updates for free, or as included with your original purchase. So just recently, I think there had been like 10.4 before this, and then now they've moved on to 10.5. And 10.5, I think, is probably the biggest, as noted by plenty of news sources, as noted as one of the most significant feature updates that Logic has had probably in years and years. I mean, I think this is the first time that they've gone through and removed and updated some of those legacy items that have been in there since, I don't know, 2003 or 4 or 5. It was just some of these legacy products that were originally put in there, including their interfaces too. It looks like a 2002 interface for like there's these synthesizer interfaces where there's these weird knobs that you have to, these weird just rotating features of the interface. It looks ridiculous. I don't know any other way to explain it, but it's pretty wild for some of the stuff that's just remained in computer systems for a long time. But for 10.5, they try to go through and update a lot of that stuff, and it's really interesting. There's a lot of cool new features in Logic 10.5. So Logic is real similar to Sonar, which is, I guess, kind of why I mentioned it. And at least through my experience, it's similar. You guys would probably think it's similar to, I don't know, what people that are listening probably actually have some, well, no one's listening. What am I saying? If someone were to bother to try and find some information out about Logic and they ended up listening to this podcast, they'd probably have had some information about it, or they would be coming from an experience with Avid's Pro Tools. And Pro Tools is like the industry standard for multi-tracking DAW software. And I've never used it. I've never opened Pro Tools. I've never seen Pro Tools, in its process at all. I've looked at a couple of videos or something, but yeah, I have no experience working in Pro Tools. And I don't know. I'm not a fan of Avid's software overall, for Pro Tools, or for the Avid system of video editing stuff either. I'm not really that interested in the kind of stuff that they put together. And really for price and stuff too, it just seems kind of overdone a little bit. So I'm pretty happy with some of the other more available tools that are in the consumer computer market. I mean, I think it's like $800 or something still to get Avid's Pro Tools, and I think that in the past it was just insanely more than that, even with kind of proprietary. Back in the past it was more difficult. Now I think M Audio is a partner with Pro Tools, and so in the past, if you have Pro Tools, you have a lot of proprietary Pro Tools audio interfaces that you had to use if you wanted to set up your studio to work seamlessly with the Pro Tools software. Now I think they've made a deal with M Audio, which is sort of like a less expensive audio interface manufacturer. They've had like interfaces and microphones, and they've got like an array of. I think they've got like some studio monitors. They've got some interfaces. They've got like keyboards is a big one that they've got. I've got a keyboard over here from M Audio. And what is it? Yeah, M Audio. They're less expensive. They make Pro Tools interfaces, which is cool now, so that they've got a partnership with Pro Tools. And I think that they've been trying to make that more accessible to musicians, probably because it's become a more competitive market with, really with like Logic Pro. I think the industry standard stuff is, I don't know. It always seems like more secure than it should be. Or it doesn't seem like an absolute that Pro Tools should be the digital audio workstation of engineers across the world. But for whatever reason, it's just kind of taken over. And as those people are still in those positions, I think that's just what's taught in audio recording school as like a standard. Even though there's a lot of other good services and choices out there. I think I've seen Sonar and Logic taught a lot too. So I don't know, they're definitely competitive. And as I've been hearing more, there's I don't know, there's music producers that are coming out saying, oh yeah, I do a lot of my work in Logic, and there's a whole class of music producers that are Logic based producers or Sonar based producers, or I don't know, it seems to kind of rotate around every couple of years for who's doing what, or who wants to look cool. People that use Pro Tools want to look cool probably a lot of the time. So Logic Pro 10.5 introduces live loops. This is probably one of the bigger feature updates that's been seen in Logic or in an integrated digital audio workstation in years, probably like 20 years or something. I don't know. It's all seemed to be about the same, where you just have a multi-track environment that's like a linear, starts from zero time and then ends at the end of your project to infinity, let's suggest, but to your multiple minutes. And then in this, you have that multi-track view where you're just kind of layering and stacking these different sections so that they're coming together, and so you can kind of visualize how those sounds are coming together. I think now, in opposition to that, there's programs like Ableton, which had non-linear audio production development. And that's kind of complicated to say, but I think it was a different way of visualizing the interface so that you could trigger loops in time in a measure or in a bar, and those would trigger appropriately in that measure. And then when you had that setup of a couple loops that would cycle through, you could trigger those on and off, and you could kind of create changes to whatever that sound was, and then you could record that or send that out. That's kind of, I don't know, that's an incomplete way of explaining Ableton. But the idea in Logic Pro 10 here is they're kind of merging those two environments, so you have them both available to you in your digital audio workstation space at any time. And so the live loops representation that we get in Logic Pro 10 is this grid of kind of chiclet style buttons that you've become accustomed to seeing on an iPhone or something like that. But you have this grid of buttons, and then in that you can drop in loops that you have. So these real instrument loops and the loop library that you have, you can bring those over and set those up in track locations, but you just have this block there. And then next to that, you can grab a different loop or a similar loop and then drag that into the second block. And so what happens is that if you were to tap or click on that loop, you would get a play button, and it would play that one loop all the way through to the end of the loop. And then if you were to trigger that stem of loops vertically, it would play all of the loops that you would set up in that vertical column at the same time to play in time with each other. And then it would create a mix of music. It's pretty cool. It's a really nice and fast way to kind of demo out ideas. And all this time, you're not recording these ideas necessarily. You're just kind of playing them live, starting and stopping them live, and then trying to come up with sort of the mixed performance of how you'd want these stems to come together in a final production. And so it's really cool. You can have your drum track in there, or you can have a couple different variations of a drum track if you want to go between a different beat or a different velocity of rhythm during the chorus section to the verse section to the bridge. You can kind of break those pieces up. Similarly, like if you go down next to like your bass loops, you could have a bass line that was started on the intro, and then change during the first verse, and then become, I don't know, some simplified refrain during the chorus, and then kind of change out again for the rest of it, along with the lead, along with whatever else or whatever other textures you want to add into your tracking. What's also cool is there are 70 gigabytes of sounds that you can get in a sound library to attach to your Logic Pro 10.5 software. And so with this, they're all royalty free, all available to use loops and MIDI instruments and sampled instruments that you have access to create music with. So it's really cool, and it's really so much music and sound and all in all these loops contained that you have a ton of creative options available to you and right there. And that's what's cool is you don't really start off with a dearth of an experience once you just get this audio software. It comes with 70 gigabytes of instruments, of everything for bass, electric drums, organic drums, like any kind of percussive instrument, any kind of synthetic or any kind of synthesizer sound that you want to try and get, you can achieve with it. It's really cool. So yeah, you can take those and throw it in. You can do the 70 gigabyte download of data and throw that onto an external hard drive now, which is pretty cool. I think for a long time they just had this integrated database where everything had to sit on your main drive, and I think that drove a lot of music producers crazy as they try to have bigger libraries of loops and stuff. But it's probably in part because hard drives weren't fast enough back in the day for that sort of stuff. But now, and in the last many years, since like Final Cut has had video libraries on external drives, it seems like they should have made the capacity for Logic to have your loop library on an external drive a little easier. So I wanted to talk about the training stuff that I've been doing. I think I had mentioned I had done a good bit of work with other programs in the past, but this is really the first time that I've gotten into spending time learning specifically about some of the features and the controls in Logic Pro and now Logic Pro 10.5. So what I had done is gone to now what's called LinkedIn Learning. LinkedInLearning.com, huh? There used to be a website called lynda.com, and lynda.com was these screencast video tutorials of how to use different types of software and how to be trained, just training for different types of most of the time computer-related skills. So I've used that service for a number of things over the years. Specifically, I think Chris Orwig's Lightroom tutorial is probably like a standard for a lot of photographers that have been interested in so LinkedIn Learning has all of the old Lynda videos, including all of the updates to the videos that they're still continuing to produce. So I went on and I tried to find some training videos about Logic Pro 10. There's a number of videos for like essential training for Logic Pro 10, but there's nothing because now this new update, Logic Pro 10.5, is really only maybe 2 weeks old or something. There's just no new video training established for it. So I think for Logic Pro 10.4, there's a full essential training video that was produced by, was it Scott Hirsch, a music producer out of New York. And he just kind of goes through the controls and the system and stuff. And you get a good feel of like how to make changes, how to use different features, how to use the mixer versus like the linear tracking system, how to use different controls and stuff. A lot of the stuff is similar if you've used GarageBand, like I was mentioning, or another digital audio workstation that does multi-tracking in the past. But it was cool, yeah, learning like some techniques about how to apply different compress, or how to make the settings of a compressor do more specifically the types of things that I'm wanting to do in a mix. I think was some good information for me to be learning about through the Logic Pro training stuff. Also, in addition to that, if you don't, so LinkedIn Learning is a paid service. You can get a 1 month of free trial of that too, which I'm taking advantage of at this moment to get some new information in. But what you can do is go to YouTube and look up similar similar training videos, and there's a lot of people, a lot of music producers out there that have done their own screencasts of kind of walking through different services or different techniques that these digital audio workstations provide. So I was looking at a guy's website. I think it was whlogicprorules.com, and that had a lot of good training videos on it too. He had a lot of information about how different pieces of it work, and just how to make use of a lot of the techniques that you'd have to apply in a certain piece of the software to make it more effective. And I thought that was really cool. I really appreciated some of the stuff that he'd done. And because he's a YouTube channel, he's just kind of putting out content more regularly. So he has, I think, 5 videos up right now about these different features related to Logic Pro 10.5. So I think it's like a general overview. There's one specifically about the live loops feature that I was mentioning is one of those premier new interface features that's now part of Logic Pro 10.5. In addition to that, I think they've created a step sequencer, a new sampler. I think they have a quick sampler now, and they have a full sampler where you can go through and make your own samples to make your own loops. So you can really be producing your own music, and I think it's really cool, the kind of stuff that you can do. That's a big update that they've done. I think they talk about like what is the ESX 24, 27, something like that. It was this old sampler software that was probably some third-party plugin that ended up being bought and then ended up being integrated into Logic. That's speculation, but the way that it looks, it just doesn't look like Apple had ever designed it. So it's this crazy looking kind of silver software with a ton of buttons and knobs and stuff. It looks like it was supposed to be some real object, like if they made some actual pedal board, it looks like a drum machine or something, but it's laid out as a software in front of you, and it's just impossible, it seems to me, to use. So Apple's gone through and updated that kind of legacy piece. Some people are happy about it. Some people are mad about it. I see some people writing in forums, long live the ESX sampler. And then everybody, or plenty of people, saying they're happy to see it go, and that they're happy to see it replaced by a more modern piece of a more modern utility. And having the sampler go through and auto select these regions of it, so you can go through with your keyboard, and you can trigger those regions with your keyboard to play that sound out. It's really fascinating, the kind of sampling that you can do with it. There's just so much production you can do with it. So as it goes for podcasting, I wonder if I'm going to use Logic. I think Logic, and really honestly, like most of the audio production stuff that I would do, even to its small degree, which honest to God, it's really nothing. I could do this on my phone, or not that my phone is great, but just I'm not doing anything, right? So I might, I stopped using Sonar because it was kind of overkill to do the multi-tracking stuff. For just a podcast. For some audio or mastering stuff, it seems like I have a grip of how to do the editing in Logic maybe a little better than I do in Audition, even though I've been using Audition for years. I kind of have the same process and stuff, but there's sort of a way that this is something I don't understand yet. And if someone that actually understands Logic has listened to any of this, they should tell me about it. But it seems like in Audition, when you have an audio file like a wave loaded into the program and you're looking at it and editing it, if you were to apply, say, an EQ effect or a compressor, once you have those settings and then you apply it, it'll render that change to the wave, and you have to wait for it. You have to wait like 20 seconds when you apply an effect, like a hard limiter or a compressor or a de-esser, and it'll change the full waveform that you're seeing there. In Logic, it seems, I guess, more like a non-destructive editor, where you have your original waveform in your track, and then over in the mixer you can apply sends, or you can apply these effects as a stack that you can turn on and off, and it'll kind of live mix that section of audio that you're hearing. And so you can stack on a compressor first, change those settings, and stack on an EQ, and then stack on a de-esser, and then stack on a limiter or something at the end of that, or a limiter on your master output, something. I don't know. I think that's how you're supposed to do it. So you can do that, and then you can change those settings, and you're not really adapting the original waveform. You're not doing that in a stage where if you turn one on or one off, that you're kind of rendering the whole file in advance. I don't know if I have that totally right, but that's something I'm trying to figure out. So some things that you notice from that is Audition, or programs that kind of bake in the setting effect that you're making a change to, seem to operate a lot faster. I think because the track is sort of rendered and frozen, and it's not the processor's not having to do any live rendering of added effects on top of the file that's already trying to have to grab that file and then play that file and then add another layer of digital processing to it that you selected through changing settings, and then render those settings to the WAV file as it plays it without much latency. Man, it just sounds like a lot of tasks to do. So I guess when you have like a bigger Logic project with 24 instrument tracks, all with compressors and limiters and whatever other effects changes there are on it, apparently it's just really processor intensive, and it I don't know, I've already noticed, like even just with a few of the smaller demo projects that they have installed with it, and even with my computer being okay, it's already like hit like a CPU overload a few times. And Logic producers have talked about this a ton of times. There's a bunch of videos out there on like how to stop your CPU overload messages. Some of it's talking about changing your buffer size. Some of it's talking about selecting tracks and freezing them. There's a process called freezing a track, sort of similar to what we just talked about with Audition, where you're kind of baking in or rendering that track out so that the processor doesn't have to. I think that, or the whole background of getting, a ton of RAM and a ton of processor space and a ton of cores was to do some of these larger studio mixes of Logic projects. Say if you have a symphony or you have like a full orchestra or something that you're trying to do a mix of, you have these live effects and compressors running on every track, and you could have up to 100 or 1,000 tracks or something running with these live effects that have to be processed on it. And so the idea was, and I've heard this at other times, that larger studios would take Mac Pros and run them in tandem so that they would have as many tracks as that individual Mac Pro could have, and then that would be bussed down. That would be bussed down into another mixer where they would have all of those. Is that making sense? Yeah, they would have, let's say, like, I don't know, let's say 100 tracks would be on Mac Pro 1, and then they would have 300 tracks in total, so they would have Mac Pro 2 and 3, and each of those would have 100 tracks that it was responsible for operating in Logic, and then it would run in tandem and then be mixed out to a bus so that you would have all of those tracks rendered down into the 300 onto their channels. I don't know. It's crazy stuff, but it's kind of this like reduction process. They don't need to do that anymore, apparently, because I don't know, is what they're trying to sell. These the newer Mac Pros, or if you max out a computer to its fullest, you can kind of handle some of these larger processor intensive projects like that. In response to that, man, I remember in 2003 using Cool Edit Pro to do 24 track multi-track projects on a computer with 800 megahertz, and I didn't really have a problem with it. So I'm not really quite sure what I'm understanding about Logic or about audio production stuff in that capacity. It seems like there's some other tools or other utilities around, not tools, but just some other concepts, right? That allow you to do stuff without some of the some of the processor limitations. That's always kind of frustrating when the technology kind of gets in there to fight with you. But I'm sure that the intent of it is that you do more live processing. That means you have to do less rendering time on each individual track. And man, the mixing process can be really frustrating if you have to render out a million different variations of changes, which is kind of different projects that I've gotten stuck in over the years. So, man, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But it's cool, yeah. Been trying out Logic Pro 10.5 in the studio stuff, learning some keyboard controls, learning how to run some live loops, been trying to mess around with some different mixes and stuff. It's cool. Yeah, you can just grab those loops, throw them in. I can make what I've been trying to do is make like a drum, bass, and sort of texture sound loop that kind of has a couple changes in it. And then I can take a guitar, plug it into the audio interface, set effects that are built into Logic. You can pull up like a pedal board in Logic and then have that adapt the sound of your incoming real instrument and then run that into a track, or even just play live into a track, and then have those live loops kind of running on the side of it. So you can kind of create like a, like a jam loop or something. You don't have a band to play with, so you can kind of create a couple other instruments that have pieces, and then that are in a key that are going to repeat, and then you can kind of find whatever it is in the guitar that you want to kind of work out an idea or work on playing through something. So it's kind of cool. I've been trying that out a bit too. And then once you do have an idea, it's really easy to just kind of lay that down into a track and create a demo out of it. So it's really fun. Logic Pro 10.5. You guys got to check it out. I also remember looking up that photojournalists back in 2001 had just started using a Canon D30, which I think was their very first. Their very first digital camera that was put out into newsrooms. So even for 2001, for September 11th, 2001, a lot of the media was created on film, and a lot of the media was created on like VHS tape or like really low megapixel. Like maybe 3 or 2 megapixel cameras back then. So I thought that was really interesting. I mean, I think it was like another year or another I think the Nikon D1 had just come out, which I'd probably talked about on this podcast before. That was like one of the first cameras. So there's really only a couple digital photography options back then. The idea of cell phone videos, imagine what that kind of event would have been like if every single person had a feed of video that had been uploaded or recorded on the day of an event like that. So that's what's really interesting about kind of the changes in those events as we kind of progress through history. But I was also thinking back to like Vietnam too, where there was a lot of video. Well, I guess the Vietnam era, maybe the era of the 60s, the era of the protests and the riots that had gone on to end Vietnam now and to get the civil rights bill passed. There's a lot of media created around that we still see in history books now, but a significant amount of that media was really all created by the press at the time. And that's sort of the divergence that we're seeing now, is that instead of an edited message that was represented by the press, we're seeing an unedited message that's developed and created and shared by a wide population of people across the United States. And then it's sort of edited through the crowd and then edited through the links that you receive. And really, even still, that's probably a manipulation on the total amount of information available. But it's just really interesting to see kind of the changes in progression in media. I'm not saying it's better now or worse than it was before specifically for the application of media to communicate a message to a population. It seemed like, I don't know, it's just interesting to analyze, I guess, kind of the types of things that are changing. I remember, I guess, kind of first thinking about this with the 2000, well, maybe, I don't know, probably not the first time, but I was thinking about this again with the 2017 eclipse. I know it's odd to try and compare these two circumstances, but historically I started thinking about this idea that when the 2017 All-American eclipse happened on, I think, what was it, August 21st, maybe? 17th? 2017? It was 2017, so it was probably the 20th? I don't know what it was, but when we had the All-American eclipse, there were videos and there were great photographs from almost every photographer, every Instagram photographer, every amateur, prosumer, or semi-professional. I have a bunch of photographs from the eclipse that are okay, but everyone was able to capture photographs from all over the country, and that's because they all had a piece of media equipment. And then as you go back in time to different eclipses that have happened in the past, I was trying to do that as I was looking up information when that eclipse was coming up. There's really almost no information about the past cycle of that eclipse. I think it was like back in the 90s, and so you had like some news reports from France or something. It was this kind of wobbly VHS tape that was uploaded to YouTube. There's a couple photos, like 1 or 2 photos from its appearance in 1945, and it's cool to see a black and white photo of an eclipse, but it's like 1 or 2 that exist, and now there's hundreds of gigabytes of images and different sequences and different renderings of how that eclipse progressed and passed. And so just kind of seeing that as a macro of it, or as a polysemic example, the change in time creates a change in the representation of media and how it's used to show what's going on. Logic Pro 10. Recorded a bunch on that idea during the last podcast, and really still, enjoying Logic Pro 10 quite a bit. It's pretty fun to be working with. What is it about it that I like? Well, really, I think a big part of it is all of the free loops and sounds that you get. There's a lot of other programs out there and a lot of other applications that have software instruments that you can apply or loop packages that you can download. So those are certainly available to a lot of producers, but a real positive convenience about Logic is that you can download nearly 70 gigabytes of a sound library just for free that's available sort of with the program without doing any additional or extra steps. And so that's a part of it that I think is a cool advantage. So I've been just going through and messing with those loops. Been trying to check out the Live Loops dashboard and, or I don't know if it's a dashboard, but trying to look at the Live Loops tool of how you can kind of throw in loops to this grid and then trigger them in sequences. So it's been fun to check out while I've been trying to do some guitar stuff. Really just, pardon me, really just kind of regular practice stuff is all I'm up to. But it's cool. There's a couple amp modelers that you can get into when you have your guitar plugged into an interface into the computer. And it's a great system to do it with. I've been trying to master. Is it called mastering? If you're doing it this way, I've been trying to produce out the podcast using Logic Pro for at least the last one, and then I did some editing on a couple others. But I've been trying to go through and sort of learn how I could use Logic Pro to do the production of the podcast stuff, which kind of goes up and down. I mean, so I'm recording. I've said probably many times, recording into an H4n, which has good preamps for vocals. I think like part of the tonal quality of how a microphone ends up picking up the sound, I think, is part of the preamp power that's supplied to the way that the microphone picks up the information. I don't know, or how it's recorded. There's something about that. I guess what it comes down to is sort of the I don't know, the quality of the sound that you're hearing. So it sounds really quite good and natural just coming through as it is. I've used other systems before that is not the case. It sounds really tinny or really thick and muddy, or just I don't know, some weird digital noise that's in there. A lot of problems and stuff that I've had to try and overcorrect in the past. But so this is okay. So when I throw it into Logic, I don't have a ton of things to do, but I do try and set a track, like a channel strip, with a few different effects features applied to it so that it kind of adjusts the audio enough to make it, I guess, a little bit more suitable for listening to in a podcast. Most of that is adding a compressor in a stack. So I have the voice compression, so really loud things and really quiet things are normalized a little bit so that they don't pop and become really loud if you're like hearing it on headphones. You know, it doesn't go from the normal state of voice that my voice is in now to some other really high loudness all of a sudden. I have an equalizer on there to get rid of a couple odd room tone frequencies. I think there's a high pass, or there's this little filter pass that you can do where you kind of pull out a piece of the EQ really high and sweep it across your spectrum, and then you find this frequency. There's probably like 2 or 3 that are just sort of these weird warbly high-pitched tones that can be in there, and you can kind of drop those out with the EQ, and that really it kind of changes. You wouldn't almost notice it if you were just listening to the full mix. You'd think, well, I can't hear that sound, but really you can in some way. It's this sort of agitating bad sound that you also hear along with everything else. Local singer, and I guess it's kind of obvious, but I think it's a little bit more of just mixing to the volume and loudness of sort of what it is. So yeah, it's cool. Learn a little bit about how to add some different effects to the audio. What is it? The channel that I'm working with. So I have a de-esser placed on it to get rid of some of the sounds. I don't even know if you can hear it. Maybe it de-essed it all. I'm sure it didn't. And also I think what is it, like an echo? Or not an echo, a reverb effect that's on there. And I think that's supposed to be like a dry and wet mix. It's supposed to add like a little bit more space to the sound. Sometimes it could be a little too flat or I guess dry sounding. And so you're supposed to add a little reverb to it to make it feel like it's in a more natural room space than like a quiet box or something. I also put a noise gate on there so that any sound under like a certain level will be cut out and stripped away, so that there's not any like distracting lower hums or buzzes or something like that. I remember on my first podcast, I think I was running like an analog input into the computer to record. And my first podcast, like back in 2009, and there was always this like kind of, I don't know, this low ground hum, this that would be floating on in the background, and it was annoying. But I think I'd apply like a pretty aggressive noise gate to try and chop it out, and it just sounded way over processed. Shoot. So kind of the live and learn part of it, but I wish I did a little more learning of it. So I have this channel stack. I've been working in Logic Pro. I've been trying to figure out the mixing stuff. I'm kind of tweaking it here and there, and just kind of having fun with some of the music production stuff that you can do. I'm looking at this controller. There's different types of MIDI controllers out there. A lot of the time when you talk about a MIDI controller, you're talking about like a keyboard or, like a piano keyboard kind of a thing, but not a piano, just a controller, they call it, because it doesn't have any sounds in it. A piano has strings and hammers that, it's sort of a physical operation. It's triggering an actual harmonic sound to occur in real space. With a controller, it's just buttons, and then the computer processes those MIDI sounds to play back a sample or a generated tone of some sort. So the mix fade in and out or whatever that kind of stuff is. There's those DJ controllers, but this one is more like a digital console. So it's I think an 8-channel mixer is really what it looks like with a 9th channel master. And instead of having like outputs, like sends and outputs for 1/4-inch jacks on the top to go to analog equipment, it's really just a controller that drives MIDI information through USB into Logic or into other digital audio workstations, and then allows you to control those knobs and features of your digital audio workstation through the controller. So it's really cool. So you slide, you're going to mix something, so you want to slide the mix of channel 1 up to a higher volume, but you want to take channel 3 down a little bit. You can do that physically just on these sliders that are there, and then you can punch in for record or arm for record or select or mute or whatever it is. And then there's a number of different kind of control features and knobs on the sides where you can get into some of the things. So I've been looking at these controllers, looking at an X-Touch Behringer, or what is it? It's made by Behringer, and it's an X-Touch Compact is one of the ones I was looking at. There's an X-Touch 1, and I think just the general X-Touch is like a full-sized like digital console space. It would take up most of a desk to have. It's like and there's a mini out there too, which I think you can throw in a laptop bag. Cool that those options exist out there. And yeah, it definitely seems like it'd be kind of interesting for music producers to try and use. But I was also looking at some of the things that you can do with it in Lightroom too. So these controllers, you can have MIDI signals run into the computer to trigger different keyboard commands or different clicks and stuff. So I guess what you can do, and there's been some softwares made for it over the last couple of years that do Lightroom control. So you can have a controller like this and turn a knob, and then that knob will respond to a fader, or one of those sliders that exists in the develop module of Lightroom. So you want to change the white balance of a photo. Well, you have a slider for your white balance, so you can, or a rocker or something. You can turn it up or down, or you have a slider that can go to a high exposure or low exposure, or change your brightness or hues, or adjust your blacks or your tone curves. You have access to that, of course, all on the screen, but you also have controls of that in physical spaces, buttons mapped to that controller through this software. I think a couple of the pieces of software that I've seen are MIDI to Lightroom, MIDI to LR, I think is what it's titled as, which I'm sure you could search. There's There's a paid software called P-Fixer that exists out there that that has a free trial. You should try it out if you're interested. And then there's another software called LR Control. And I think that's also another piece of paid software that you can get a free trial for. There's a few videos online that kind of express how some of these mixing pieces go, but really I don't think there are that many videos that describe how mixing with an X Touch or mixing with some kind of MIDI controller for photos in Lightroom really works. There's some stuff like there's a couple guys kind of going around and tweaking some photos, so you get the general idea of what it is, and I guess that's really enough. I mean, you know how to edit the photos, but yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how the controllers plug into it. I've heard it helps with productivity and workflow. I've also seen plenty of professional photography. It's not like every top photography studio is implementing a controller, and that's why they're getting better at editing. I need to learn about sort of that higher end of stuff, but I swear sometimes, of course, there's a lot of the bespoke journeyman photographers that just sort of work and do all the work and then build a package and send it out. But there's also a lot of photographers working in commercial markets or wedding markets too that shoot a bunch of photos and then have a number of editors go through the library, and they'll do editing, color editing and stuff, but they'll also do more tedious tasks like keywording or like metadata description editing or something, where they go through and make a bunch of changes or a bunch of log lines to have liner notes inserted into the metadata of a photograph. Interesting as a process, but yeah, I've seen a couple interns hired in a photography studio just to work on tagging and logging and keywording stuff, which I don't want to do. I don't do that in my Lightroom catalog at all. I don't know, to the whatever degree I need, but it's like in a collection or something. So I've seen that, but I've also seen really talented visual editors, where their training is just to use Photoshop to apply sharpening. You go, oh man, wow, that's what you do? Is just use Photoshop at a really high level to add multiple layer effects into a channel so that you can apply a type of sharpening to the pixels that we don't really understand or use. I mean, I'm sure it's quite good as just the slider in Lightroom, but apparently for these professional magazine layout photos, they go through a couple passes of pretty high-end, old-school guys that go through and do specific types of sharpening modifications to the way that the photographs look, especially, I think, if the photographs are being enlarged to a great degree. If you're thinking about a billboard, but you're thinking about the physical size of a 35-millimeter piece of film. Is that what it is? 36? 35? What is it? I'm not sure, but if you think about just like a frame, like a film frame, it's just, a small little block. And then you think about that stretched out to cover an entire billboard or even just something on TV. I think they have to do a lot of image manipulation to, what do they call it? Interpolate? To interpolate enough pixels to create out of nothing enough pixels to make it so that the resolution of an image can actually exist as something that large. And I think there used to be some pretty specific processes in place for art directors to send those photographs through to get them appropriately edited for print in a magazine. And so all that sort of stuff has kind of gone out the window now, and now it's just sort of, juice the photo up in an editor to make it look cool, to get it out online or to get it into a book or something. So maybe it'll seem regrettable in the future that was sort of the case with a lot of the images, but also probably not. I think it'll be fine. It'd be cool to get a pro editor on board, but I figure that's sort of a way of the past. I think I talked before about different ways of the past that like film photography had gone, where there was stock photo sessions where you could just take pictures of a corral of horses. 30 photographers would take a picture of a corral of horses, and they'd all sell that in a calendar and make, we're heading out to the wildlife refuge area that's out south of Corvallis here, the Finley Wildlife Refuge. Went out there for a couple days in a row to try and check out some of the area out there. I think it's now opened up a little bit more officially. I think during the first weeks of the lockdown here in Oregon, the road to that was gated up. I think almost for like 2 months, the road that cut through to the main section of the wildlife refuge had been boarded up. Or not boarded up, but I think there's like a gate that cuts across the front entrance of it. Even though it's really sort of a public road that cuts through to the highway on the other side. I think it goes from Bell Fountain Road over to Highway 99 on the other side, so you can cut all the way through. But they closed off both ends, I think, because there's a visitor center in the middle there, and they didn't want people coming in and congregating or I guess traveling on the trails for a period of time. So yeah, and I noticed that on a couple other spots, a couple of the entrances, they said that maybe, I think that you couldn't enter for a while. Then they sort of shifted those regulations around, like I think kind of talked about on a couple of the previous podcasts, and then you could walk, but then you had to remain socially distanced and the rest of it. So I think it's opened back up mostly now, and has been for the last few weeks. Normally, I think the wildlife refuges in this area open up on April 1st and then close down again on November 1st. And I think that's for the migratory bird, I guess, seasonal patterns that they are in. So I think it's an area for Canadian geese to come in and winter in, if that sounds right. I guess that's far enough south. It's loaded up there in the wintertime. It's loaded with birds and cranes and egrets and stuff. It's really cool to go down there and take some binoculars and look around. A lot of eagles late in the winter. I think that was pretty cool during like February and in March of this year. There were a lot of bald eagles out in that area of the Willamette Valley, just sort of roaming around. That was pretty fun to see. A lot of hawks too. That was really cool. So yeah, a lot of birds in that area, but I cruised down there this last week for a couple trips to kind of hike out to a few spots now that it's a little more opened up and you can kind of travel through. And it's nice. It's really close to the area around here, and it's a little more opened up. That's one thing I was noticing as I was looking for a few areas that were a little more opened up as a meadow and not as tightly constricted of a forest area. Well, I'll talk about a few of those places next too, but this area is really cool though. The Willamette Valley area, or really probably a lot of Western Oregon in total, this time of year, for the last couple weeks of May and the first couple weeks of June, there's still so much water and rain and sun in the area as it's coming down that we really get a lot of flowering plants this time of year. And then later into July, well, even by the end of June, and then as you go into July for sure and August, it just gets so dry that there's really no more wild flowering plants out on the hillsides and in the meadows. And so that's what's really cool about right now is you can go out into a meadow and you're going into pretty tall grass because the grass is growing really tall as well right now and going to seed. And then there's a lot of different types of, like milkweed that has the white flowers that grow on it. There's another type of kind of thistly weed that grows yellow flowers. And then there's just additionally like a bunch of cool stretches of fields of wildflowers that are out there that kind of grow interspersed across these fields. And specifically, I think I photographed them before, talked about them probably every year. The foxglove are in bloom this time of year, which is really cool. So you can go around to just about any hillside in Oregon, and you're going to see these really cool stalks of the stalk with this, kind of clumped pattern of bright purple, magenta flowers that are sort of budded off of it. And you'll see them everywhere in this part of Oregon for sure. I mean, gosh, like anywhere from, I think it would be like Roseburg to Seattle, probably. I don't know if it goes that far, but I don't know if I really saw them a lot in southern Oregon, just wild on the hillsides during the summertime. There's probably a bit out there right now, but really this area of the Willamette Valley and up into parts of the Cascades before it gets too high in elevation, you see a lot of that out there. Anywhere that there seem to be logging activity, where there's some down trees there's an open field of grass, it kind of interspersed, and then and some sunlight that's able to get through to the bottom of the forest floor. It seems like there's these rows of foxglove that kind of come in. Maybe they were invasive. I'm not sure how they really came through. I mean, they must have been like tracked in somewhere. I see them spilled out by roadsides all over. So it makes me wonder sometimes. But yeah, beautiful flowers, really cool, and the way that they bloom for probably the next 3 weeks is really one of the natural highlights of taking photographs in Oregon, or of going out and looking at stuff in Oregon. It's really just one of the nicer bits of the year when you can go out and you can find cool, bright flowers just about anywhere that you kind of head out to. So yeah, I've always appreciated kind of going out and trying to get some photographs of that this time of year. I noticed that a little bit in Oregon, specifically, probably anywhere that you photograph stuff, is that there's sort of a seasonality to some things where there's a 2-week period of the year where a certain idea is just going to work better than other periods of the year. I know you can travel around and do different things. You can be dynamic, but really kind of thinking of it like, okay, what am I offered during this period of time that the year provides me? So, in the wintertime, just kind of obtusely, you could think, well, you get snow in the wintertime, and in the summer you get sun, I guess, or in the fall you get colored leaves, which is, I guess that's a pretty easy one to understand. But even that, you kind of get into the dynamics of taking photographs in the fall. And if you were to think about the crisp, kind of bright look of early October before everything gets real wet, or before the leaves really drop, that's when you're able to get a lot of the crisp, like kind of vibrant color and mix of colors, where you get like the greens, the oranges, the yellows, and the reds sort of spread through the different trees in the area. You get that kind of late September, early October, but by November, still the fall, you get a lot of stuff that just looks like it's, it's in a place like this with its 4-season base. And it wasn't like this in Hawaii, right? It was almost the same every day, to a fault almost. But similarly, in an area like this where there's changes throughout the year, this time of year, in late May and early June, like I'm talking about, you get these cool blooms of flowers, and that's just a different dynamic than what we're going to see later in the year. I don't know, late July, August, we'll have a bunch of blackberries in bloom or something. And all through the rest of the year, there's different things. But right now, we get a bunch of Oregon grape, those bright, cool yellow flowers that are spread across the hillsides as you're driving out to the coast. Or, like I was mentioning, the foxglove and the wildflowers that are growing. That's all pretty cool. So that's what I was up to, trying to find out at the wildlife refuge. This time of year, there's really not much wildlife out there, as maybe you'd figure. But I think during this area, this season of the summer, a lot of the animals that would naturally be there have headed off for a while. I don't know if it's up to the mountains. I think there's a good-sized herd of elk that go in and out of the wildlife refuge there. I've seen them a few times. I think maybe I talked about it before in this podcast, but like last winter I'd seen them a couple times. But I think I was thinking specifically maybe sometime in November. I think that's near their rut. Though I'm not really sure the dynamics of how elk work. But yeah, I definitely saw a few bulls. You can see, their big racks kind of walking through this open field of a wildlife refuge, and then yeah, a bunch of the does that were around. Oh, I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, maybe on one of these podcasts, that we were out at the wildlife refuge. Well, yeah, so strike what I said, almost. I mean, I'm kidding, but we were out at a further south section of the same wildlife refuge, looking across an open field at dusk, and we saw, well, I'm not sure what it was. It was an elk. It was an elk for sure. But we saw a lone elk maybe 200 yards out across an open field, and it just kind of cruised a little zigzag as it kind of like went through this field, sort of scoping and bending down to chew. And we watched it for a while, and then we ended up taking off after 45 minutes or something. But yeah, we were just up there hanging out and having like a picnic or something, hanging out. And yeah, this elk popped up and cruised around out there. So I guess that was, what was that, mid-May or so when we last saw that. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, just that lone elk. So he's probably headed up to the hills, I guess, by the time that it's going to get pretty hot out here. I bet the people around there sort of know their natural migrations a little bit better. But it's cool. Yeah, you can go out there in the wintertime, see elk. You can see a bunch of birds. I saw a coyote out there. That was fun. Yeah, there's a bunch of animals, a bunch of natural stuff, a bunch of places you can hike around. It's cool that we have a couple areas like that are designated as it's not a wilderness area. It's a wildlife refuge. I think there's another one north of here. There's a bunch in Oregon. Really, if you pull up a map and you look for wildlife refuges, you'll probably find one near and about the area that you live. There's really a lot outside the Portland area. There's a lot, I think, along the I-84 Columbia River corridor. There's a lot, I think, down this way into the Willamette Valley and along the coast, but there's really almost nothing. I was surprised. There's almost none in southern Oregon, and there's a few, but it's pretty dispersed out in eastern Oregon. It's really, I think, just considered everything in eastern Oregon's public lands, or like what is BLM or a national or like specific wildlife habitats that they want to keep intact. And I think a lot of that program was maybe put in place in the 70s and 80s. I'm not really sure about it. There's a whole breakdown of the history. Well, I mean, a breakdown I don't have, but there's a whole breakdown of the history of how different segments of public lands were kind of attached and then set up. And so they're really not all as old as I might have thought they were. I think this one might be back from the maybe 70s or 80s, like I was saying, when they finally had it established. And so even still, there's like a few farms and a few there's a bunch of buildings and stuff out there already, because they had built things before there's ever any public land protections. And so now there's those structures there, and you drive through, and it's cool. It's fine. I think a lot of it's managed land, so they have like a number of fields, like I was mentioning, that the elk kind of cruise across. But in the summertime, like right now, they have a bunch of tractors down there, and they had gone through and they had gone through. Is it a combine? They went through and cut the hay. They cut the grass that was growing, and then they made these giant rolls, not bales, not those square bales of hay that you would see, kind of as like a commercial product, but these really huge bales of hay that seemed like about as big as my truck around and as tall as my truck. And then they stack 8 of those up onto a flatbed not a pickup truck, but a flatbed semi truck. And then they have like a double trailer. So they have, 16 of these big bales. And then they're doing runs of that all day to take out this grass product that they've produced on the land there. And I think that's sort of one of the multiple use cases for the land management that they do, where they do this, kind of like I was talking about earlier, you do this time of year, you do this next time of year, because it's just what the land and the environment offer you at that time. So I was out there the other day, watching these tractors kind of cruise around and pick up their bales of hay that they had been setting up. And then I think after that, once that's done, as it gets into the drier season in the rest of the year, I think it goes. It just kind of hangs out until the fall, and then that's when the elk come back in, and that's when the birds come back in. So it's cool going out there and checking out a few spots. I've been enjoying it in the afternoons. That's a good spot to kind of head out to, and it's an easy spot to get to, and you can kind of find like a bunch of open areas where you can kind of focus in on just some real specific singular points. Like I have this 50 millimeter macro lens on my camera right now, so instead of just going out and taking wide angle, broad landscape photos, which is a nice area for, you can go in and with that macro lens focus in kind of real specifically and tightly onto a cluster of flowers or a grouping of flowers, and then kind of pick your angle of view, and kind of pick your depth of field and sort of select how or something. Any I guess kind of small detailed item you can move that lens right up next to. And I think is that because of its its minimum focal distance? I'm not sure what that was called. What is that when it's however many centimeters away from the front of the glass of the lens it is until you can first get something in focus. With a lot of lenses, like if you try this with a telephoto lens, some telephoto lenses I've had. Like I think I had an f4 telephoto lens, and you could not focus that lens in something less than 8 feet of distance. You had to be like 9 feet away before you could get something in focus with that lens. With something like a macro lens, you can get 6 centimeters away from the lens, and you'll still be able to keep that in focus. And I think that's with some of the dynamics of how the glass optics are arranged inside the lens. I guess I'll leave it there because I'm sure certainly the rest of it is beyond me. But it's kind of cool thinking about some of the macro stuff. So it's cool having it on there, and it's cool getting to go around this time of year because there's like I was mentioning, there's all these different opportunities to go and kind of arrange these different little bits of flowers and take some photos of them. Also, like I was mentioning, big wide open fields and landscapes and stuff. I mean, it's not quite a full hardy landscape. I want to get out and see some real mountains, or get up in the Cascades or something and try and take something a little bit more extreme in the landscape side. But as it goes, for a nice mellow field in the evening light of June, it's going pretty good. Taking some photos of foxgloves, fields of wildflowers. It's all pretty easy going bit of time there. So been doing that. I also went up to Coburg Ridge, and I had like a pellet gun. You seen those like when we were kids and stuff? You had like your BB gun. I got like a Daisy Red Ryder, but there's also like the pellet guns where you put not the copper BBs, but those little sort of they're little lead kind of parachute tipped pellets, right? And so you pop one of those in, and I had a few of those, I guess, when I was a kid over at my grandparents' place. We'd go shoot cans and stuff. But this one that I've got is like a single shot one, like a pump action one. So I went up to Coburg Ridge. So I went over to Brownsville and then headed out the back way. Went up to Coburg Ridge, and there's a bunch of different roads that sort of cut off there out into the forest and up in the hills and stuff, where you can go up to a dead end, and people go shooting up there all the time. It's interesting during this lockdown and stuff too, where there's a bunch of people that aren't able to go back to work but are still trying to occupy their time. There's a bunch of people. Or it seems like when you go out to a wilderness area, I talked about this a bit before in another podcast, but if you go out to a wilderness or a more remote, there are 10 people that decided to go out to the middle of nowhere. And once 10 people show up, even though there's a lot of people in Oregon, once 10 people show up in the middle of nowhere, it starts to seem crowded. And so even on a Tuesday afternoon, if you go up on Coburg Ridge, there's going to be a lot of pullouts and roads and different areas that you would think maybe would be providing more solitude at some point in the past. Now you're going to come around a corner, and there's going to be a couple trucks pulled over already into a spot, and they're already firing away. And then you just see that as you kind of do S-turns around the different, around that little forest gravel road as you kind of cruise around in the hills there. So I went out, I found a spot that was cool. It wasn't, heavily crowded and stuff, but set up a little target and stuff, and then was practicing with this little pump action pellet rifle that I was trying to check out. That was kind of fun. Pellet rifles, cruising around doing some target practice stuff. Really, I was trying to get to be, I guess, like a little bit more of a consistent shot at a specific distance. I've heard that before, where like what you want to try and do if you're getting I don't know, come on, did you hear me? I'm shooting a pellet gun. But if you're trying to get into some shooting stuff and you want to kind of refine your consistency so you can get a good shot. I think the idea was like at 50 yards and then 100 yards. What you wanted to try and do was get a pattern, or get like a, I don't know, probably something in about the size of a dinner plate is what I had heard, where you want to try and get a cluster of shots fired into the space of about a dinner plate. And I guess that's sort of showing that as I'd take a shot, I'd have the consistency to get it into a specific point of a target that's actually selected, even at a range of somewhere around 100 yards. And I think that's part, like, I hear hunters talking about that, like, you're a good shot, but are you a good shot at X range, which I think is a preliminary element of if you're doing any kind of gun activity, but or if you're actually like doing some real shooting. But I don't know. Like Eastern Oregon set something up at like 50 and 100, like I'm saying, and then kind of practice on trying to get the, I guess, the distribution of my shot placement into a space that would be about as wide apart as a dinner plate. And then when I can kind of do that, then I guess I'd have the confidence to sort of consider that if I am taking a shot at a target or whatever, I'm not really going to be a hunter, I suppose, but yeah, if I'm firing at a target at a range, then I know that that my shot placement's consistent enough, or that my use of it is consistent enough that it seems like I should be doing it. I hear about that with like archery too. Like when people are getting into, well, I guess bow hunting more specifically. Where they want to try and make their shots at 30 yards and then 40 yards more consistent, so that if they do take a shot when they're hunting, they have the shot placement and confidence in the shot placement at that range, so they can take a shot and take an animal down, I suppose. Because that's kind of one of the worst things is if you're outside of that, if you're hunting and you're outside of that, say dinner plate sized target patch, then you'll get a bad hit, they say, and then it won't be as direct, and then it'll really, I think, generally just cause more suffering, as we would maybe leave it there in the conversation. But so I don't think that's really anyone's goal, like when you're out and about. So yeah, it was cool doing some target practice stuff, trying to get into that with some of the time that I've had. But I wanted to talk a little bit on this podcast, even though I've been going on for a while now, about wedding photography. And I thought that the wedding photography industry was maybe one of those interesting problems that we're going to see kind of continue to spill out over the next months. It seems like with COVID, and then with the lockdown, and then with the multi-phase reopening plan that we have, there's going to be a lot of businesses and industries that come back online, and a lot of people seem to get back to work with a significant hiccup in the system. But it seems like maybe those industries will come back online and get back to work sort of smoothly. I'm curious about the wedding industry, or the wedding industry, the events industry overall, and then as it sort of trickles down the economic pyramid there, how does that arrive at wedding photographers? And that's sort of one of the questions that I've been mulling over the last weeks. I mean, it seems like everybody went through the experience of having any booked gigs during the month of April or May, just sort of canceled and evaporated right before everyone's eyes. So I was curious how that was for any wedding photographers out there. I mean, I remember there's like a wedding back on like March 6th, and now I think of it, and that just barely snuck under the wire there. And then for the last many months, there's been no public gatherings of that type, and no events for that kind of thing. So I was curious, what's that going to do to industries where really you just have to have some level of confidence, like market confidence to try and participate in. I was thinking about, like vacationing, or even a lot of leisure-based stuff. It seems like a lot of families are going to be in a position where they've not been working for a period of time, and to some capacity they're going to be in the hole. I mean, with everybody's mortgage crisis or rent crisis or job crisis, or please fill in the list of what we're going to be experiencing in the next six months, or what it's going to be identified as experience in the next 6 months. It'll be interesting to kind of go through. As I understand it, like even in places like California, where they're getting into their phase 2 and then phase 3 parts of the reopening, I think they're going to have bars and then nightclubs return, and then I think maybe later into that even is when you're going to get event centers to open back up again. That's more for like concert venues or sporting event venues, that sort of thing. But I was interested, just kind of more specifically, like how is a wedding venue going to reopen? And I figure, kind of given the news of some things, it seems like there's just going to be a lot of things that reopen. They're just, we're open again. At least in a number of states, it seems like Texas is sort of moving that way. Oklahoma's moving that way. I don't know, it seems like a lot of those kind of Midwestern and Southern states are sort of moving in that direction pretty quickly. And really, as even I can say, a lot of places in Oregon, especially this rural area of Oregon, there's not many masks. There's not many private business guidelines that you interact with. So there's just not, and I mean, with that sort of stuff. So that's what I was wondering about. Yeah, photography, like for family photography, like any family photo gigs I had, like are probably evaporated for the next couple months. I'm sure. Like when are we going to get? I mean, a lot of families that are together, I'm sure, are fine. But do they want photos right now? Do they want to spend a significant amount of money after all this stuff has happened, or just like the number of people that would have been interested in a sort of a luxury purchase of a larger photo package created for them. It just seems like, well, let's not have someone over at our house, or let's not go out to somewhere as a family, or let's not drop all this money on something that we don't need anymore. And I bet there's a lot of industries that are going to be kind of suffering from that as we sort of come out of a readjustment from, well, what is it that we need in the 2020s now? And what was just sort of a superfluous like luxury item that we had in the past that's no longer really necessary. I don't know. Maybe I think a lot of stuff in human nature will just kind of pop back to the way that it maybe had been before. Like I was just mentioning, it seems like the season of considering this stuff for a lot of folks is past. And then for a lot of folks, in addition to that, there's a lot of face masks and face shields and distancing behavior going on. So it'll be interesting to see how that divergence either comes back together or continues to divide. And it seems like right now we're in a time where things like that just sort of continue to divide. So maybe that's what it'll look like for the next few years. But I'm not sure. I think as it goes, as a consumer goes, I think that a lot of consumers will be able to get what they want. If they want to go out to eat, if they want to get married, if they want a photo package, they'll be able to get one. As it goes for the businesses, I think that that's going to be a little bit more concerning, where all of those small businesses are going to have to compete for a much smaller whole pie. And that means their slice, I think, is going to be a lot slimmer as well. So maybe it'll be interesting. I think it'll be it'll be a big dip, but then I think it'll probably return. I don't know, maybe in a year or so. Depends, I guess, on like what this second wave stuff goes like. I don't really expect to see any multi-generation weddings or family photo events coming around soon. I mean, gosh, like I was doing the family portrait stuff in Hawaii last year, and that's not going on at all anymore. What are they doing? I mean, I've thought about this it's not the first time I thought about it, but gosh, like, yeah, what are those people doing now? The photographers or the hotels or any of that? But and additionally, the families, when are they coming back? I mean, Hawaii hasn't opened up anything yet. They're still completely locked down. I think they're arresting residents that go outside in the wrong way still. So when is the confidence to go on a 7-day trip to Hawaii going to pop back in? And then when is that also going to include getting a hokey photo package with your family? Man. Or, yeah, like inviting your elderly grandmother or grandfather to a wedding or something. It just seems like, oh, man, I wonder, are those people just going to be on Skype? Maybe they'll need photos and videos more than ever now. Oh. It'll be a multimedia wedding where you're just in an empty room with the bride and groom and pastor, and then it's streamed over Zoom